Here at SciShow, we like to get to know our viewers, and we know that the people who find our videos are pretty special. So we decided to do a little market research to get to know you all better. We found that SciShow fans are extremely likely to identify with the following statements. You have an analytical mind, though you might also space out at times. You pride yourself as an independent thinker and don't accept other people's statements without good proof. You love variety and tend to rebel against too many restrictions and limitations. You don't always reveal all of yourself to others. And finally, you have a great desire for other people to like and admire you. That sounds a lot like you, doesn't it? Except we're just kidding. We didn't actually do any research, and we made up all of those statements. But we're willing to bet that some of you really did feel a connection to them. Why is that? Personality tests and profiles take advantage of a weird psychological tendency that also benefits everything from horoscopes to fortune tellers to BuzzFeed quizzes. Here's how it works, why we fall for it, and what to look for so you don't get duped. Before we can get into why these profiles are so easy to believe, let's step back and get into the history of personality tests. The first modern standardized personality test was the Woodworth Personal Data Sheet, also known as WPDS, which came out in 1917. It was designed to predict which soldiers were vulnerable to shell shock, or what we now call PTSD. However, right when it was set to launch, World War I ended, so this particular test never got passed around at scale among soldiers. The first version of this test consisted of around 125 yes or no questions. These included things like, have you ever fainted away? Are you bothered by fluttering of the heart? And do you think you have hurt yourself by going too much with women? All very relatable questions, if you ask me. And while this version of the test never got widely used, Woodworth's later work on personality testing started a craze of people wanting a test to tell them about themselves, and the WPDS helped set the standards for personality testing going forward. Academic institutions, employers, and psychologists soon began devising and using tools to assess people's tendencies. These early tools have roots in capitalistic industrial interests, and were obsessed with the concept of adjustment in early personality test design. In this context, adjustment refers to how adaptable people are to the norms of the era, including the rules and decorum expected of a booming workforce. Basically, they wanted to find tests that would weed out the people who couldn't get in line, or worse, wanted to get on the picket line. Because as we all know, a unionized workforce is so bad for business. From there, these tests found broader popularity, including glowing coverage of a widely used test called the Wadsworth scale in a 1942 Reader's Digest article. The story, titled Fitting the Worker to the Job, explained to readers that these tests were used by companies like Lockheed Aircraft as a so-called scientific way to fit people to their jobs. There were questions like, do you like to pass along a good story? Do most of the people you meet interest you? Do you like to see the villain punished? The results supposedly revealed personality traits like a tendency to be overly emotional, or whether you're more of a lone wolf than a team player. But there's often a difference between something seeming sciencey and being based on, actual high-quality research. And in 1949, a researcher and college professor named Bertram Forer expressed his doubts about all this personality testing hullabaloo. He even said that most of the time, personality profiles weren't any more specific than saying that a person has opposable thumbs, meaning that the profile might say things that are true about whoever's reading it, but they're also true for, everybody else. Which is when Forer decided to experiment on his students. He passed out a personality questionnaire in his Intro to Psychology class, and he told them all that he'd be analyzing the results and creating unique personality profiles for each of them. Everyone received their assessments in the classroom, seated far enough apart that they couldn't read each other's papers. The students then reviewed and rated their personality summary for accuracy, and even scored each bullet point in the list of 13. Only one student rated their results below a 4 out of 5. So basically the entire class felt that their scores were pretty accurate. But you may have anticipated the twist here. Those assessments were not in fact tailor-made for each student, and instead, they all got the exact same list. Actually, you did too, because all those statements from the start of this video were basically paraphrased versions of what Forer told his students. Sorry, by the way. Forer made a list of general, vaguely flattering, and universally relatable statements. So why did everyone believe that their list was so perfectly tailored to them? Well, that's the Barnum effect. The Barnum effect was named after P.T. Barnum, the iconic and problematic showman known for his ability to captivate and often manipulate an audience. The Barnum effect is the phenomenon where if you give someone a personality test, they're pretty likely to believe that the results are true and accurate, regardless of how hard the profile maker actually tried. There's something about taking the test itself that makes an audience more likely to believe the end result. All of these different generic personality assessments are called Barnum profiles, and they all show no substance. Other experiments have been done after Ford dunked on his intro class, with similar results. Humans just have a tendency to fall for Barnum profiles. It's still not entirely clear why that happens. Some researchers think that the broad and highly generalizable statements do apply to all or most people, just like Forer said. And the reason so many people put stock into them is that they're written to be pretty one-size-fits-all. But that's not obvious to the test taker. Multiple studies have also shown that some individuals will even believe that a Barnum profile applies more to them than to the general population, which means that even though the statements are really vague and nonspecific, the recipient doesn't see it that way. It could also be that people want to believe favorable statements about themselves, which is why even the more negative parts of a profile usually come with a compliment or positive spin at the end. Like this morning, my co-star told me that sometimes my temper gets the best of me, but deep down I have a heart of gold. There could also be confirmation bias at play. This is when an individual affirms statements or evidence that support their preconceived notions, while overlooking what doesn't fit. It's pretty likely that some or even all of these reasons are part of what makes a Barnum profile so believable. Once you know what to look out for, you can see how our tendency towards buying into the Barnum effect has been around in many forms for ages, in everything from horoscopes and fortune-telling to how ChatGPT and other large language models tap into the Barnum effect to make its vague statements seem believable. And the likelihood of someone believing that their Barnum profile is a perfect fit for them might be related to a few key traits. For instance, studies have looked at how self-image might influence whether people believe these vague personality descriptors. The idea is that if you have a weaker sense of self, you tend to look to other people to tell you who you are. And one of those other people might be your local astrologist or a litany of online personality quizzes. People with an external locus of control, which means they don't feel like they have a lot of control over their own lives, also tend to accept Barnum profiles. Moreover, if you give someone a personality test and they like what they got, they'll end up believing that the entire test itself is a really accurate test. Like, let's say I've invented Madelyn's ultra awesome personality matrix, and I gave you that test, and your results say that you're smart and funny and nice and really pretty and you have great hair. Then, when you go tell your friends about my test, you'll be like, that personality test was amazing and super accurate and totally worth it. You should try it. It only cost me like $8. Hang on, this has given me a good idea for a side hustle. Some research also suggests that people tend to accept their Barnum profiles if the assessment tool uses lots of data, or at least if the recipient thinks they did. For instance, you're more likely to believe your horoscope if it's based on the specific date and time of your birth, rather than just the month and year. Or you'd be more likely to love your ultra awesome personality type if the test is 50 questions long instead of just 10 questions, even if the actual results are the same either way, which is good news because my new and improved questionnaire is 800 questions long. Bring snacks. There's still a lot to tease out around the various types of Barnum profiles and the factors contributing to people's acceptance of them. Despite Forer's early work exposing this effect, personality tests are still super popular today, and even claim to be based on lots of their own data and research. Have we cracked the code on making accurate personality tests in this modern era? It's complicated. One of the most common personality tests out there is the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator Assessment, or MBTI, which has been around for over half a century. It's a proprietary questionnaire that sorts people into personality types based on 4 binary categories: introversion versus extroversion, sensing versus intuition, thinking versus feeling, and judging versus perceiving. The assessment groups people into one of the 2 tendencies for each category, so someone can be INTJ or ENFP, which means there are 16 possible personality profiles in total. It's gone through many iterations over the years, and the current version available online is 93 questions long. Remember what I said before about the illusion of more data making you feel more certain about the results? I know you remember. You have a great memory. Of course you do. They even offer training courses so you too can become certified to administer the test and interpret the results. Their big thing is using MBTI in the workplace to understand the dynamics on a team so you can pair the right personalities together for the best outcomes. So you'd think that if this company has poured so much time and effort into refining their test, it's gotta be good. Unfortunately, that's not really what the evidence from non-MBTI affiliated studies says. See, when researchers want to see how well a certain assessment tool, test, or survey actually works, one thing they'll do is have the same people take the same test multiple times. If they get the same score each time, we'd say that tool has good test-retest reliability. And in studies of MBTI, where participants took the assessment multiple times, up to half or even more test takers received a different result for at least one of the 4 letters. Not a problem with Madelyn's ultra-awesome personality test, I assure you. It's not clear what percentage of people who take the MBTI assessment accept the accuracy of the results, but the internet is rife with people singing its praises, both about how well their profile fits them and how well MBTI scores fit their friends. Whether or not the data supports it, MBTI is an extremely popular and well-liked system to try to categorize people's personalities. Which brings us to the question of whether or not it's even possible to use a survey or questionnaire to accurately evaluate someone's personality. Like, is this whole thing a losing game? Well, researchers don't all think so, and there have been quite a few attempts to make a statistically validated personality testing tool. One example is the Big 5 personality trait model, which gives people a low, medium, or high rating in 5 dimensions: extroversion, neuroticism, openness, conscientiousness, and agreeableness. These tests, and newer variations that include subcategories of these 5, do seem to show better test-retest reliability. One major reason that newer tests based on the Big 5 are more reliable is that they're based on accumulating data from multiple long-term studies from the 1990s onwards. And they're rooted in the principle that if a personality trait exists in humans, languages will adopt words to describe it. The more cultures and languages there are that talk about, say, extroversion, the more likely it is that it's a valid metric on which to assess people. So these Big 5 studies looked at the actual language that participants and cultures all over the world use to describe personality in multiple languages. However, there's a problem. Pretty much all the data we have on the Big 5 comes from what researchers call weird countries. That stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. Researchers have come up with this framework to basically remind themselves that people in these highly educated, industrialized societies are so different from the vast majority of human history that they're not a great proxy for understanding everyone everywhere. Which means that if you only study weird countries, you can't assume that your results are universal for everybody. And yeah, it seems that the evidence says that the Big 5 doesn't really work for non-weird populations. So there's definitely a lot of work left to do if we want to figure out how to understand personalities for everyone, weird or not. Plus, there's a concern that even the best test out there might be flawed just by the nature of what a test is. When you have to answer every question from a list of predetermined options, it's called a forced choice measure. These tests are easy to administer and to grade, but the downside is that they're really rigid and can flatten nuance, including how people's personality traits can change due to the passage of time and other variables. We've all stared at a multiple-choice question and wished there was an option to check other. So trying to make a questionnaire-style test that can accurately gauge anybody's personality might be kind of impossible. In any case, if you've ever found yourself putting a lot of stock in your horoscope or MBTI or any other personality test, it's not a unique intellectual failing on your part. It's just human nature. Personalities are so much more varied and dynamic than we're led to believe, and it's hard to reduce them to types. After all, I'm far too complex to be summarized by one single test. My ultra-awesome personality matrix report told me so.